Interaction between American Indians and white settlers goes back centuries. There are countless agreements, trades, wars, and battles. One devastating event affected the lives of many and changed the course of American Indian life. The Indian Removal Act caused thousands of Cherokee and other American Indians to be removed from their homes and has become a well-known tale of history. But what was the Trail of Tears? And why did it happen? The Trail of Tears was a path that was traversed by about 16,000 Cherokee American Indians, beginning in multiple southern states that they were living in. These states included Alabama, Georgia, South and North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, and Missouri. After the Indian Removal Act was put into place in 1830, these inhabitants were led from their homes to a new land west of the Mississippi River. Most of the new land was in Oklahoma, but some ended their journey in western Arkansas. This trail was nearly 1,000 miles long, and many of the American Indians had no other option than to travel by foot. These desperate conditions led to many Cherokee contracting illnesses such as typhus and smallpox. Others succumbed to hypothermia and starvation. Here, a traveler witnesses the Cherokee passing by in 1839.
The sick and feeble were carried in wagons. Great many ride on horseback and multitudes go on foot. Even aged females, apparently nearly ready to drop into the grave, were traveling with heavy burdens attached to the back, on the sometimes frozen ground and sometimes muddy streets, with no covering for the foot except what nature had given them.
By the end, 1/4 of the Cherokee American Indians that traveled the trail died, leaving the population of this group at about 12,000. The Indian Removal Act did not occur suddenly. Many events happened over several years to make the Cherokee Indian removal take place. In 1802, President Thomas Jefferson came up with the idea of the Indian Removal Act. Although he wanted the land they contained, he didn't force them off of it. He claimed they wouldn't be relocated without their approval. In 1786, Jefferson stated, "It may be taken for a certainty that not a foot of land will be taken from the Indians without their consent." So he instead gave them a reason to leave. He laid out the plan for the removal from December 1802 to February 1803, which contained 2 parts. The first part was to try to get the tribes to be involved with big debts so that they may have to give up property in order to pay off the debts. In a letter written in 1802, Jefferson said, "There is perhaps no method more irresistible of obtaining lands from them than by letting them get in debt, which, when too heavy to be paid, they are always willing to lop off by a cession of land." The second part of the plan was to try to push out the tribes by populating the Mississippi River region with white settlers. They would be surrounded by whites, and eventually the area would be so crowded they hoped the Indians would leave. On April 23, 1803, another major event occurred. This is the day Georgia was paid $1.25 million by President Jefferson so that they would give up their claim on western land. Georgia's claim was on the western border that extended all the way to the Mississippi River. The U.S. wanted the land so that they may create new states. In this agreement, it was also promised by the U.S. government that all other Indian rights to land in Georgia would be terminated as soon as it could be done. This promise is what put the most pressure on the Congress to pass the Indian Removal Act in 1830. Another event that led up to the Trail of Tears is known as the Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, France offered to give the United States a large amount of territory that was located west of the Mississippi River and went all the way to the Rocky Mountains. Back then, this land was known as Louisiana. Thomas Jefferson, the president of the time, took the offer immediately. He saw this new land as a perfect place for the Cherokee. He believed they would not coexist well in the east with the rapid expansion of white settlements and population. In the year 1828, Andrew Jackson was elected for president. Also in 1828, in Georgia, there was the first gold rush in U.S. history. This became a huge reason for people wanting to relocate Cherokee Indians. The Cherokee owned land in Georgia, but people were trespassing on their land to get gold. There was already great conflict between the Indians and the states. They were constantly arguing over what rights the Cherokee had and did not have. When the Cherokee went to the Supreme Court about the gold problem, the court ruled that the Cherokee were not a sovereign and independent nation. But when the Indian Removal Act was passed in 1830, the U.S. Congress had given President Jackson authority to negotiate removal treaties. When the president spoke about the removal taking place, he gave several reasons for the benefits of their absence. It will separate the Indians from immediate contact with settlements of whites, free them from the power of the states, enable them to pursue happiness in their own way and under their own rude institutions, will retard the progress of decay, which is lessening their numbers, and perhaps cause them gradually, under the protection of the government and through the influence of good counsels, to cast off their savage habits and become an interesting, civilized, and Christian community. The gold rush was in full swing by 1829. It was also in this year that the governor of Georgia announced that all the Cherokee land belonged to the state. It was these events that led up to the passing of the Indian Removal Act. What exactly did the Indian Removal Act do? The purpose of the act was to empty the area that the Cherokee were living in. After the Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson believed that the American Indians would live more peacefully west of Louisiana. The white settlers and government were quickly expanding their land, and they had plans to dig for gold in this land as well. However, the Cherokee did not want to be forced out of their homes. Some had already moved west to be undisturbed by white settlers, but many were still living south. This was a major conflict of the event. So, to solve this, the government promised that the American Indians would not be removed by force. However, this rule was not always followed when it came time to remove the American Indians. The Cherokee were also promised that they may live in this new land forever. This was the government's compromise. The act was passed in 1830. This was during Jackson's presidency. In his address to Congress in the year 1830, he went over the progress of the Removal Act. He referred to the American Indians as savages and expressed his happiness that they would be leaving. May 28, 1830. This is the day Andrew Jackson addressed Congress. The big announcement, the Indian Removal Act, was passed. In 1835, the Treaty of New Echota was created, which was the final piece to the puzzle to allow the Cherokee Indian removal. New Echota was a city in Georgia and the center of Cherokee government. The agreement and final compromise was that the Cherokee would receive western land as well as payment, and then they would leave the land and be relocated. Only some of the Cherokees agreed to this, though. Others, listening to their chief John Ross, were against this idea and denied being removed from their land till the end. The Cherokee tribe was split, and eventually the Indians following Chief John Ross killed the Indians who signed the Treaty of New Echota. But since the states had control over the Cherokee, they would be forced to do what the states wanted. The Cherokee American Indians began walking the trail in 1838. As many as 3,000 were crowded into boats and traveled a water route. One person who was traveling the trail on land described their day-to-day experience.
In the morning, our time is employed in taking our bed from the little wagon in which we sleep to the large wagon, replacing the seat, getting water, cooking breakfast, putting up things, and harnessing. Soon, we are hurried on by the wagons we accompany to the next encampment. Here, we have to render what we did in the morning, put up our tent, get wood and water, prepare supper, and fix our bed.
The conditions were bleak and the people unhealthy. It took up to 4 months for all American Indians to reach the destination. Most of the Cherokee walked the trail from 1838 to 1839. The travelers covered around 10 miles every day and stopped at a campsite at night to rest. The dead were buried on the side of the trail in a haste. All of the Cherokee suffered from loss, pain, and exhaustion. They gave the event the name Nana Dalt Suni, which means the trail where they cried. After the Cherokee reached their destination, they soon had to re-establish themselves at their new homes in Oklahoma with few supplies. Upon arrival, there was a great deal of conflict between the Cherokee over loyalties. Their solution was to create a new government which they called the Cherokee Nation. This way, all groups of Cherokee would be united. They eventually built churches, schools, and businesses, which led to them creating communities, along with newspapers. They established a great educational system, which included 144 elementary schools and 2 higher educational institutions. The Cherokees are now officially a sovereign nation. The American Indians were affected greatly. The Cherokee population decreased by about 1/4. The number of American Indians was quickly dropping, and still is. The Cherokee adjusted to their new home and made it theirs. Today, there are 3 Cherokee tribes federally recognized, and 2 of those are in Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation and the United Kiowa Band of Cherokee Indians. Throughout the process of the Indian removal, there was a great amount of conflict. The main conflict for the Cherokee themselves was from the government attempting to force them out of their homes. From another perspective, the government had the conflict of being unable to get the Indians to comply with the people's demand for gold and land. Finally, from Andrew Jackson's perspective, the Cherokee Indians being forced to relocate and walk the Trail of Tears was a compromise because he wanted the land the Cherokee Indians had in their possession. So, providing them with supplies and land they could relocate to was his idea of a compromise. Some of the Cherokee agreed to this idea, but others were greatly against it. In the end, however, the Cherokee were forced to relocate and walk the Trail of Tears, which will be a part of history remembered and mourned forever.